and welcome to another episode of REDtalks.live, where we discuss ranting, engineering, DevOps, hence the Red. And this is the first episode of the year, so I'm really excited to have two guests on. I think this might be the first time we've had three people on the show. These are two people I work with and greatly admire and respect from F5 Networks. And these people, we keep hearing in the networking industry how important it is to stay relevant. We all need to learn how to script or to code or to kind of understand how to automate and orchestrate, no more of this manual, people-oriented CLIs. And I thought it'd be really interesting to hear from two people who actually came from dev and back into networking, and what the experience was like and what it is to hear about networking people kind of wanting to learn scripting and coding. And so this episode is going to be called Devs Gone Rogue. And with me, I have Cody Green and Daniel Edgar. Cody, you're on the left. I always start from the left, so why don't you go first and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so Cody Green, I'm a cloud solutions architect with F5 Networks. Been with F5 for a little over 7 years and spent about 14 years in industry before that. So started as a developer, was primarily writing applications in things like PHP and Java, and then started to move into systems. We just kind of found ourselves doing a lot of systems operations and wanted to join that organization and see what we could do there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Corey. And Daniel?
So yeah, I'm Dan Edgar. I am on the West Coast. My role is a field systems engineer with F5 Networks. I've been here for about 10 months. But before that, I was a developer working with mostly web applications, enterprise applications for a period of about 20 years. And then after a while, you just stop counting languages. You just recognize them by their differences in syntax and things like that. So SPA applications, API development was actually pretty huge, but went through all kinds of, two-tier client server apps, SOAP, WSDL services, all kinds of wonderful things in that period of time.
So for those who have been following any of the Big Stats development open source project, Daniel was the one who very kindly put all the unit testing in and schema validation. It's so handy when a recovering developer magically appears within F5 Networks that can just, in a matter of minutes, throw all those things together and make it all look grown up and professional. So cheers for that. Greatly appreciated, Dan. Corey, question for you. How do you feel about Perl?
Ripped out a lot of Perl in my career. So
just a random question I like to throw into people every now and then.
It's a self-obfuscating language is what one engineer told me. It's job security.
Let's not attract too many Perl haters. I feel pretty similar though to what you're saying there. So okay, I wrote down some notes. This is pretty rare for me to try and stay on topic, so that's why I'm looking over here every now and then. First question, and this is to either of you. What do developers think of networking?
I think that, when I was doing development, one of the things that we looked at was networking was something that was just there. We expected it to work. And ultimately, as we started to code further down into the stack, we realized this magical thing didn't always work. There was a lot of complexity in it. And so, studying computer science, we had a very strong network and network security teams. And so we were being taught some of that. I got to hang out with some of them. And I don't know, for us, that was something different. A lot of us gravitated towards network operations, network security. And you started to realize that it's not something that just magically works. I still run in that today. When I work with developers straight out of school, we were working on a mobile API project and trying to secure it. And I was trying to explain to two developers fresh out of college what RFCs were, right? They just had no idea. Their frameworks supposedly took care of that for them. So I think that a lot of people just expect that component will always work, especially as we get into public clouds like AWS and Azure.
That, you know what, I want to ask you a quick question about that actually. So the whole RFC thing, I mean, if anyone watches how many like JavaScript frameworks for front-end developments come out like a year, it's clearly not burdened by that thick steel cage of governance and RFCs like networking is. There's a kind of a reliability there, isn't it? That like the IP doesn't just magically change when one vendor releases a new version, because it just doesn't work. It breaks the whole internet.
Yeah.
Whereas something like JavaScript, like, oh, just don't run an update on like a Friday afternoon and take everything out. What about you, Dan? What's your thoughts on networking from when you had your dev hat still on and you worked with us?
Well, just a quick comment on that. That standards thing is like a wise engineer told me like 20 years ago when I was first starting out at a large chip maker coding. He's like, well, the wonderful thing about standards is there's so many to choose from. So with that, developers are interesting folks. I had a lot of curiosity throughout my career, and I knew how to stand up servers and enough networking to be dangerous. But interestingly enough, a lot of the developers, the really brilliant ones I've worked with before, may not even really understand how to fix their computer when they break it. So again, the networking has been like that's not a jab, but it's really just where their focus is and where their minds are. I'm way up at interacting with the user or building services, things like that, where all these other things just exist. Somebody else takes care of them, and that's how the network was viewed for many of the teams we were on. It was just this plumbing that was already there, this mystical thing that when it went down, everybody, when there was a problem with something somewhere, it seemed like that's where everybody pointed to first. Oh, it must be the network. But yeah, I think a lot of developers just assume it exists and someone else is going to take care of it, and also kind of perceived it as this very fixed thing, right? Okay, well, our application is performing in such a way. This is all, this isn't something that can be seen as something that's really a part of the delivery of an application. A very separate entity is kind of the prevailing thought I'd noticed with most development groups. I had more curiosity, and I had started to forge relationships with network engineers to understand a little bit more about how that worked and how how servers work and things like that. So started to expand my knowledge base. But for most development teams, it's just something that's there that can either be commoditized, and I don't have to think about any of that stuff. If I went to cloud is the perception, or if it was running on a local network, it was somebody else's problem. So very, very much a discrete, thing associated with I guess the network computing and the skill sets and really how much it takes to keep a network running that really development teams weren't aware of. So that was kind of enlightening to me.
That I want to just touch on something you said there about how some of these like more brilliant people you've worked with, these engineers, and some of them wouldn't have known how to actually like bring their laptop back from the dead. Like they were very good at an area that they worked on, but not as generalist as maybe we assume. And I'll be honest, I've been in situations as well where I've been asked to give a talk to a whole room full of developers, and that I think was the most intimidating audience I've ever encountered. I was like, wait, literally, I'm here to be judged now, and I think this is going to go terrible. And I was asked to come and talk about DevOps, and I was terrified of giving that talk. There was like 30, 40 engineers who were in their specific area, like total elite ninjas. But what I didn't realize is that is their specific area, and they kind of tend to stay in that. And I think it was my fault for not getting over my insecurity and thinking, well, if I reached out and I talked to these people more, I would notice probably that they're not out learning about new things that are coming often. And I should have just had these chats with them and been a little more open and realized, okay, these people are like at a level I will never be at what they're doing. But maybe they don't see and I think that relates greatly to the networking side of things. Like we make these big assumptions that there's a reason everybody kind of looks up to these people because they're amazing, but that doesn't mean that they've seen and done everything that's out there, and we should break down the walls of communication that there seems to be and be a little more open with each other. Would that be a fair kind of assumption from your experiences?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, one of the best parts about my job is I'm definitely not the smartest guy in the room, but I know a lot of smart people, and I get to glue them together to get them to start thinking about problems from each other's perspectives and to get them to collaborate. That to me is really rewarding. And if left on their own, people tend to silo in their thinking and their approaches and whatnot. So you're not welcoming, diversity of thought and, a different way of looking at things as you do when you like assemble a truly cross-functional DevOps or an agile team to build something. It's very satisfying getting all the smart people together to get them to solve problems together when they see things cohesively.
Any thoughts on this, Cody?
Yeah, I think, one of the neat things I like doing with F5 is you were one of the founding members of our Super-NetOps class. And this is a really good training program to help educate NetOps into starting to do API development. I'm always shocked when I actually have at least a third or half of a room sometimes that are developers, because they want to see what it is that their network counterparts are actually having to do to try to embrace things like DevOps or try to embrace automation. And to me, that's always a good sign, because if your developers aren't interested in understanding what the others are having to learn or overcome, then they're still siloed, and we're not doing what Daniel's talking about. We're not pulling all the smart people together to build a cohesive solution.
I think when that does happen, it tends to be within a silo, though. Like, let's get all the smart networking people and try and guess what the application people are expecting of us.
Yeah.
So if let's say I'm a network engineer working for an organization that's running a business, it's a retail online business maybe, and I know things are changing, things are evolving. I mean, how should I reach out to developers? Like, I've heard all sorts of ideas, like just having like lunch and learn sessions, just, I guess, advertise that you're there to communicate and that there shouldn't be a wall. Like, how should we start this step? What's the great way to begin?
I think one of the easiest ways is look for meetups in your city. If you have the luxury of being in a large city, there tends to be lots of DevOps meetups or industry meetups where you're trying to go through the same process. Maybe some of your peers have already further down that path. I have worked with companies that they are trying to facilitate that in their own organizations. So they are trying to do exactly what you talked about, Nathan. Maybe you work for a smaller company, they're not there. There's nothing wrong with stepping up and trying to sponsor it yourself, right? Understanding that you don't know everything is one of the hardest things, I think, in both development and IT to come to terms with. But once you do that, man, it does move your career along faster, because you get to work with a lot of people and you get to say, hey, I don't understand this. Could you help me? And the other thing I would say is there's a lot of resources now. We have the luxury of having LinkedIn Learning, Linux Academy available to us so that we can do training basically at any point we have free time. And you can go focus that training on anything that you want. It doesn't always have to be related to the task at hand.
Yeah, great point. And I was thinking also, even locally, if you're working for a company and you want to reach across the aisle, you want to talk infrastructure, or infrastructure wants to talk development, get together with some folks. Be brave. Start talking about what keeps you up at night. These aren't technical things per se, but talk about use cases. Then share, shadow a network engineer for the day. Network engineer shadow, infrastructure, a development person each day. Learn how they might approach problems, right? They say developers tend to value, automation and moving things quickly, and maybe the ops people tend to value keeping things up and not getting yelled at, right? But there's something to that, right? It's like there are patterns and practices that can be shared across silos to, that can benefit both groups without having to get, extremely technical. So in addition to everything that Cody mentioned, yeah, just be brave, have a discussion and talk about what services each other provides and what kind of benefits you might be able to have with each other, even at the same company.
So you said something there that I think you really nailed it there when you talked about understanding what each other values. Because I see this a lot, where there can be like two people in an email conversation, and it's obvious that they're both using the English language. But it's also obvious that they're not talking about the same thing, and you just kind of keep going around, and like that happens all the time. And I think this largely comes from we should try and get away from this expectation of like one of these competencies needs to be more like the other one, because that's just not going to work. There's a reason a person was hired to be a software engineer. It's their experience and their ability to do those things, not just because they read a manual about programming. And equally on the network side, I mean, we don't just plug a Cat5 cable in. That's not the job, if only. Wouldn't that be the biggest common industry? That's all I do is plug cables. No, there's a lot of work going on. There's advanced like routing protocols and things that are just rewritten in line, and transformation technologies. And there's just so much stuff going on in the network. We can't expect the developer to just suddenly not be producing revenue generating or productivity improving code to take 5 years out and learn about networks. But if we understood each other's values that drove us to make decisions, I think most of the problem would vanish immediately. I mean, do you think that's a fair kind of statement?
No, absolutely. The language barrier is probably one of the hardest to overcome. I think that you're nailing it in the head, that the value of what do I bring to the table, what do you bring to the table, and making sure we understand that we're communicating that together. I know for a lot of network engineers, when we work with them on automation, these are terms that they've never heard of. But a couple of sessions, we mentioned a couple of terms, they all of a sudden it's like, well, I understood more in the next meeting I was in, right? I was able to actually communicate what we were doing. It's always fun when I work with an account and I'll be in a meeting with them a couple months later and you hear them using the terminology that we introduced to them in some training. But more importantly, the meetings are actually functioning and resulting in an outcome that everyone's going towards, right? We've been at roadblocks in the past on that. So I absolutely firm believer in that.
Nice. My favorite is persistence and state. Totally different things in the two different areas.
Yep.
But they can talk. You can watch them just talk. A network engineer and a developer talk about persistence and state all day long, and talking about totally different things.
Yeah, understood. I think the best example I had is we were asking about containers to a networking team. They're like, yeah, we do that. And they showed us their data center. No, it was a physical container. I was like, no, sorry, that wasn't what we were talking about.
Oh. Wow.
That's cool. I like that. So what kind of tips would you give to a networking engineer who, not just conversationally, like I'm a big fan of just to have lunch with someone in a different team, bring your sandwiches along and say, you know what, let's talk about what is it that is important to us. To one, it might be 5 nines connectivity. To the other, it might be rolling out as many services as fast as possible. Break down the walls and understand what drives each other to be successful in their job. And you've done, I think, at least half of the work of simplifying things. So stepping beyond that, though, like let's say, a network engineer is listening to this episode right now and they want to know kind of how to get started. Should they go off and try and learn as much on their own, or should they start out by, I think you said, Cody, before shadowing? Like, it's a great idea. Like, what would you recommend as the best route forward of those options or others?
Yeah, Daniel, you want to take this one?
I kind of falling back to what I talked about earlier, right? It's about relationships and start asking tough questions, right? There is a tremendous amount, I believe, especially the more time I've been able to spend over the last year, roughly, with network ops and network engineers, that there's a tremendous amount that dev teams can learn from operational support. It seems like dev tends to think about, in terms of automation, like I can build something really fast and I can put it out really fast, but once it's out there, what do you do? I mean, is there what operational know-how and what operational disciplines have gone into supporting something through its entire life cycle? Not just building a bunch of crap very quickly, but how to support it through its entire life cycle. And I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned on the ops side on how, what care and feeding looks like of, many, many, many interconnected systems that developers just haven't been able to see. But at the same time, ops, network engineers might benefit from, okay, well, I'm doing the same 5 things, an hour, day in and day out. Is there a better way about this? Is there a safe way to do some experiments to automate very low risk things with a very minimal failure domain and try it out for a while? Do a series of small experiments, and they're very busy. It takes a lot of time, but start really small. Don't feel like you need to boil the ocean. Take a very small topic. Like was mentioned, both of you guys talked about the Super-NetOps program. Take any one of those things that's, again, this low risk and in a small pocket. Do some experiments with it. Pull a dev into it if you want, if you need a little bit of help with it. But experiment, and then do a little, like an agile risk perspective on it afterwards. How well did it work? Is this something we want to keep, expanding our use of? Don't do anything risky in production or feel like you need to do everything all at once, but start small, get comfortable with it, understand why you'd be able to do it. And if you have some comparative metrics to make your case for your next leap you're going to take in terms of automating, your day-to-day activities for time efficiency, but also for consistency and delivery, go ahead and do it, but start small and then continue to grow. And celebrate your successes and radiate them, right? Let everybody know what you're doing. That way they're not, oh, I don't know, I'm scared of this thing, I don't understand it. But share your success stories with others in your organization, so that enthusiasm will then again catch fire, and everybody will be learning from one another, even in one department. So I've seen a lot of cool things that can happen, and that makes you feel really good to be a part of it. So start asking questions, and like was mentioned earlier, there's a tremendous amount of things out there, whether it be YouTube videos, Code Academy, gosh, Stack Overflow, a ton of different things to help you get started, as well as like the Super-NetOps program that we have, and F5 University learnings as well. So start somewhere, start small, inspect and adapt.
I'd have to agree. One of the biggest challenges I see a lot of times for people is they try to bite off something too big. Or they think that, well, this is too complicated, I can't learn all of that. The common example that I give is, if you can go through the first Super-NetOps class, which is about 4 hours, right? Not a difficult class to get through, but you have enough skills now to do one of the top requests we hear from almost every developer. I want to bring my node up and down, and I don't want to have to play Mother May I, right?
Right.
So this is a little script that you could learn to do after going through a very small class, and you would make a lot of developers happy. And it's that first kind of step in. And it's like, well, okay, now if I can bring a node up and down, what else can I do? Let that curiosity start to take over. I think a lot of people get concerned as well of, well, what does this mean for my job? Hopefully, you're showing people that you can learn a new skill set, but more importantly, you get to go back to doing what's creative, what's fun, right? The mundane of, creating something day in, day out, over and over again, at some point that does start to not be ideal, right? You don't want to do that. If you can start to do, well, my job's now to take a step back, and I can learn how to automate, or I learn to do some light development, right? I may not write all the complex stuff, right? Maybe I do the first prototype, and then I hand that off to developers. But that kind of stuff always excited me, because let's be honest, it's a lot funner to build something than it is to maintain it. Wouldn't you like to be the guy that builds?
Right.
I couldn't agree more. Example you can see just in the corner here is I've pushed everything out of camera shot, because every Monday I try and attempt to clean up my office to start the week. And that's not fun, because that's not shiny new stuff. Like,
right?
Whatever this week's new JavaScript framework is for front ends, it's much more fun to take a look at. So yeah, maintaining, especially if you look at the REDtalks Studio dying plant in the back there. I'm not very good at maintaining. I like to get new things myself. Last question for you guys, and I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this one, so I'm totally putting you on the spot.
Uh-oh.
There was a book, or maybe a blog or a podcast, that I was to recommend people jump on to understand some of these exciting evolutions that are going on. What would you recommend?
I'm going to have to, I know it sounds cliche, but for me, I absolutely love the Phoenix Project. I thought that when I read that, it related so well to me from an operations and networking perspective, right? I'd been in the scenarios that everyone in that story was going through. And so, it's hard, right? If you tell a developer that, they're like, from a network perspective or an operations perspective, you haven't read it, that's definitely the starting point. It's a very easy read because it's told as a story, right? And I guarantee you will relate to at least someone in that book, and that you're going to say, well, that's me, right? I'm that guy.
I felt the same when I read it. That's a good one. I'm gonna definitely +1 that, Cody. And if Dan, that was the one you were gonna say, you're probably sweating right now. Then,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe Calvin and Hobbes. Like, if you
No, that's great. That's a really good thing to mention, because it gives you it takes the issues that folks are dealing with now, and there's some nice narrative and a story around it, really, but it makes it real in terms of the amount of improvements they make, and what's out there and what's possible. And for many people that read it, or gosh, if you're lazy, listen to the audiobook like I did, you see yourself somewhere, right, in that story. You're somewhere in that story. So that's a really good resource. And again, I'm not a plugging any particular vendor, but find some sort of online training like a Linux Academy or Pluralsight or something. Because I will say, anytime I had any sort of downtime in my last job, I would plug in, and I want to learn something conceptual about Dockers or Kubernetes or Python or Angular or Node.js, whatever. I could plug in and go through the exercises on my own time and try to learn something new every week and learn something new every week. And I found pretty quickly they're really addictive. But I could then take my learnings and use those as an opportunity to automate the mundane. So again, less ops, more project work, kind of a metaphor, right? So I wanted to, the way I could clear my plate to do newer things and do work with newer technologies or solve bigger problems is solve the smaller mundane things that were getting in my way. So that was probably a non-answer after the Phoenix project, which was a great answer, but find a resource you like and hold yourself accountable, keep plugging in and use that as a resource to continue learning. And then, but only, learn things that you can immediately apply. So start small.
No, I think I actually like that you had very different answers there, because I'm always got a book, or like you, Dan, audiobook, because can't read. And then on the other side, though, I'm always looking out for, maybe a new module on NPM.js that's just for some reason trending like right at the top, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to learn that today. And so it's not really your traditional kind of written form or like a course, but that's how you evolve. You be inquisitive, you be present, and you go and you look for these things. You don't wait for them to become a problem as part of your organization that you then have to try and fix. The amount of times someone points out that the horrible callback that I'm working on has been solved by someone 5 years ago, and that nobody writes that code anymore.
Right.
I used to sit there and look at things like that and be like, oh, amateur. But now I'm like excited. I'm like, thank you, because that'll now be the last time I ever try and do that again. So I don't feel bad about it, and no one should. Like if someone kind of opens your eyes to something, run straight at that. Like that's how you evolve faster. So be bashful and just kind of get in there and kick the tires. I mean, the stuff I learn every week, like the bigger danger I think is when you stop the learning. Like that's when you're just going to become complacent a little bit, and that's not a happy place for you or the people around you. So yeah, or just be on the lookout. I'm constantly trawling for things trending, projects on GitHub or whatever, and just even if you never use it, read about it. Just understand why it's so popular to everyone else. Because if it's so popular to everyone else, there's probably a good chance that sometime in the next 12 months, that's going to bubble up again, and you're going to remember and be like, yes, I do know about that, sort of.
And something, actually, sorry to interrupt, I've been inspired to do, just because there's so many brilliant people I work with like you guys that are doing this already. If you found something that works well for you, publish it. Publish a Git, just put it in a blog, put it in a GitHub repo, whatever. It doesn't have to be beautiful, but if it provided you some value, it might provide someone value at some point. Anyway, that's also in the same situation. So again, as you learn, look for opportunities to give back to the community as you're able to learn from the community, be a good steward in there. Now, you might not be comfortable with doing that right away, but remember to do that. And that will just continue to feed this wonderful ecosystem of learning out there we have at our fingertips.
Solid advice.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, we're going to wrap up the episode there. Thank you very much for coming along and being on the first episode of 2019, nearly said 18, in January. And great to hear the perspective of some devs who've gone on networking, devs gone rogue, as we're calling this episode. I've been your host, Nathan Pierce, on Red Talks 40-something to, I think, Meaning of Life, 42. And my guest, thanks for coming along. Say goodbye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks all.
Rudy and Dan, really appreciate it. And our audience, delightful to have you. Thanks for listening.